I'm the only person in the world who wears this hat.
Hear what you say. I'm happy now.
All right.
Hollywood's heartbeat just stopped. Diane Keaton, the woman who made awkwardness beautiful and turned every turtleneck into a statement, she's gone. 79 years old, and just like that, the world feels a little less bright. Her family's planning this private goodbye in California. No red carpets, no flashing cameras, just love and the kind of silence she would have appreciated. But here's the thing. While tributes are flooding in from every corner of the entertainment world, there's one voice that's cutting through all the noise. Goldie Hawn. Her co-star, her confidant, the friend who shared 3 decades of laughter and tears with Diane. What Goldie said at the memorial, it didn't just break hearts, it revealed something about their friendship that most people never knew. Before we get into what really happened between them and the untold story of how Diane built herself from absolute nothing, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the bell. Because what you're about to discover about her final days and the promise she made Goldie keep, it'll change how you see everything. Let's dive in. Here's what most people don't know about Diane Keaton. Long before she became that icon in oversized blazers and floppy hats, she was just Diane Hall, born January 5th, 1946, right here in Los Angeles. You'd think growing up beneath Hollywood's golden skies would have been magical, right? Wrong. Her childhood was anything but a fairy tale. Her father, Jack Hall, he was all about rules and order. Love in that house wasn't expressed through hugs or warm conversations. It came through discipline and structure. And her mother, Dorothy, get this, she was actually Mrs. Los Angeles back in 1955. This woman had stage dreams, real ones. But somewhere along the way, those dreams just faded into cooking dinner and keeping house. Diane watched it happen, watched her mother's spark dim a little more each year. The Hall household ran like clockwork. Grace before every meal, polite smiles for the neighbors, but feelings. Those stayed locked up tight. Nobody talked about what hurt or what they actually wanted. Young Diane would stand in doorways, watching her mother's face, seeing the exhaustion behind those forced smiles, and something inside her just knew this wasn't how life was supposed to feel. Years later, she'd say, "I grew up in a family that didn't talk about feelings. We simply lived inside them." That one sentence pretty much sums up her entire childhood. But here's where it gets interesting. While her teachers were calling her difficult and her classmates thought she was strange, Diane wasn't broken. She was resisting. She was pushing back against all that unspoken pain in the only way she knew how. Then came high school theater and everything shifted. She got cast as Blanche Dubois in a school production, and for the first time in her life, she felt seen. Not judged, not misunderstood, just seen. Acting wasn't about pretending to be someone else. It was about finally being allowed to feel something real. That realization changed everything. In 1966, when she was just 20 years old, Diane packed up her grief, her hunger for something more, and her mother's unfinished dreams into one suitcase and bought a bus ticket to New York City. And here's the beautiful part. She dropped her father's name, Hall, and took her mother's maiden name instead, Keaton. Every single time someone called her Miss Keaton after that, they were saying her mother's name. It was like she was carrying Dorothy's lost dreams with her, determined to make them mean something. Listen, that winter of 1966, when Diane stepped off the Greyhound bus in Manhattan, it hit her like a punch to the chest. The cold wasn't just uncomfortable, it was vicious. She found this tiny apartment on the Upper West Side. And I mean tiny. The wallpaper was peeling off the walls like old skin. The pipes made these groaning sounds all night like the building itself was in pain. And the radiator? That thing coughed more than it heated. She slept in her coat most nights, watching her breath form little clouds against the cracked window while snow piled up outside. New York looked like a dream from a distance, all those glittering lights and possibilities. But inside, That freezing apartment, the only sound was her own thoughts getting louder and louder. Here's the reality of those early years. Diane would wake up before dawn and queue for auditions that ended before they even started. Tiny rooms above cafes, thick with cigarette smoke and broken hopes. And the feedback? Too tall. Too strange. Not the type. Those words stuck to her like the cold, following her everywhere. By noon, she'd be waiting tables at some diner where nobody bothered learning her name. By night, she was singing in basement clubs, so hazy the air actually burned her throat. Her voice would shake, but she'd push it out anyway, thin and defiant. The poverty wasn't just about being broke, it was about survival becoming an art form. She and another girl from the playhouse would split a single sandwich into 4 pieces, laughing through the hunger because what else could they do? She pawned her only good pair of shoes just to make rent, skipped the subway to save a nickel for coffee, wrote dialogue by candlelight when the electricity got shut off. Some nights when the wind howled through those Manhattan streets, she'd walk just to stay warm, too proud to ask for help, too stubborn to give up. There were moments when she'd press her palms against that frozen window just to feel something solid, something real. Not yet, she'd tell the darkness, and somehow the darkness backed off. Then 1968 rolled around. After 2 years of rejection, hunger, and barely hanging on, the call came. Hair, the Broadway revival, needed someone raw, someone unpolished, someone who could be painfully, brutally real. Diane showed up to that audition barefoot, shaking from hunger, hollow from all those months of hearing no, but somehow still burning with this wild kind of life. The director watched her in complete stillness. Then he said 5 words that changed everything. Don't change a thing. That night, standing under those white-hot stage lights, all that pain from the past 2 years, all that hunger and cold and rejection, it finally meant something. The audience didn't see some polished performer, they saw truth. And that's what made her unforgettable. Years later, she'd admit, I built myself out of fear. It wasn't poetry, it was just facts. Every no sharpened her instincts. Every unpaid bill taught her to be smarter. Every freezing night carved courage into her bones. Long before Annie Hall, before The Godfather, before the world knew her name, there was just this young woman walking through snow with empty pockets, breath-forming ghosts in the frozen air, and a spirit that absolutely refused to freeze. Now here's where things explode. 1972, The Godfather hits theaters and Diane's playing Kay Adams. She's the only soft thing in a world built on power and violence, standing next to Al Pacino's Michael Corleone. That film didn't just make her famous, it gave her the voice she'd been clawing for since she was a kid, watching her mother fade away. But 1977, that's when immortality happened. Annie Hall, those turtlenecks that became a whole fashion movement, that hesitant smile, that nervous laugh, none of it was acting. That was just Diane being Diane, completely unguarded and shining. Hollywood wasn't watching a performance. They were watching someone be real on camera, and it changed everything. Oscar night, she's standing there holding that golden statue, shaking under those blazing lights, thinking she'd finally made it. But later that night, alone in her kitchen with the Oscar sitting next to an untouched glass of wine, she's whispering to the empty room, is this what it feels like to be seen? Because here's what nobody tells you about fame. Every spotlight casts a shadow, and hers stretched long and cold. The pressure came fast. Every new script arrived with this unspoken question hanging over it. Can you ever be that good again? She'd work until the sun came up, fingers stained with ink, eyes burning under harsh lights. Memorizing lines until they blurred together. Rewriting scenes nobody asked her to touch. Chasing some perfect version that kept slipping away. I didn't sleep, she admitted years later. I was scared to stop. The same applause that used to thrill her started sounding like a warning. Some nights she'd just drive through Los Angeles with the windows down, letting the cold air slap her awake, trying to remember what it felt like to simply exist without performing. I thought success would make me whole, she said, but maybe it just gave me permission to be broken in public. 1981, Reds comes along and Warren Beatty's demanding everything she's got. She gave it. The performance was raw, blistered, absolutely incandescent. I remember crying in the car after filming, she said quietly. Not because I was sad, but because there was nothing left. Critics called her fearless. She felt like a candle that burned so beautifully it couldn't survive its own flame. Then came the slide. Mid-80s, The Little Drummer Girl arrives in 1984, ambitious but messy, barely made back half its budget. Reviews turned icy. Hollywood started chasing younger faces. Everyone thought I was still on top, she admitted. But inside I was slipping. She vanished from screens not because she was defeated, but because fame without truth felt like just another kind of dying. The world that once chased her moved on. She turned down roles worth millions because performing without meaning felt worse than not performing at all. So she wrote, she directed. She waited in the shadows of her own legend. When a young actress asked her how to survive this industry, Diane said just one thing. The applause fades. The work, that's what saves you. In that quiet time away from cameras, art stopped being about validation and became something closer to prayer. She learned that beauty bruises, that spotlight burns, that real strength isn't loud, it's breath. Every sleepless night, every shaking hand, every doubt she couldn't voice out loud, it all became part of who she was, the woman the world loved. For her laugh had built that laugh out of terror. The woman who looked so free had carved that freedom from isolation. Here's where the story gets beautiful in a way you wouldn't expect. 1996, the First Wives Club set, and two Hollywood legends meet for real work together. Diane's 50 now, still carrying all that discipline and reserve like armor. Goldie Hawn, she's pure sunshine, effervescent energy bouncing off the walls, joy just radiating from her like it's the easiest thing in the world. On paper, they're total opposites. Diane would show up early, script pages covered in pencil notes, every detail mapped out. Goldie floated in minutes before they called action, laughter trailing behind her like perfume. Different stars, different orbits, but one night between takes on a freezing New York street, everything shifted. Diane sitting in her chair, shivering in the cold, trying to power through like she always did. And Goldie just walks over and drapes her own coat around Diane's shoulders. Then she says something that cracked Diane wide open. You're always the strong one. Let someone else carry it for a while. That small moment, that simple act of kindness, it changed both their lives. They weren't colleagues anymore. They became co-conspirators. Behind all the glamour of that film, the champagne toasts and perfect hair and magazine covers, there were two women quietly saving each other. Diane was still wrestling with that voice in her head telling her she'd never be enough. And Goldie, she had her own ghosts. Worries about getting older in an industry that worships youth. Fears about what happens when the spotlight moves to someone younger, fresher. Between takes, they'd whisper things to each other they couldn't say to anyone else. Confessions about heartbreak and the weird emptiness that comes with success. They'd laugh until their eyes filled up, then cry over things neither of them could fix. When the director yelled cut, their hands would reach for each other, like they both knew the real performance was happening when the cameras weren't rolling. The years after that, their bond became sacred. Dinners that stretched until the sun came up, birthday phone calls that ended in laughter, and those long, comfortable pauses where you don't need to fill the air with words. Goldie loved Diane's fearlessness. Diane admired how Goldie carried joy without making it look heavy. She moved through the world without armor, Diane said once, and she taught me how to breathe again. In an industry built on competition, where everyone's fighting for the same roles and the same recognition, They chose something different. They chose tenderness. When awards came, they'd toast each other's wins. When disappointments hit, they'd disappear into kitchens with wine and unspoken comfort. Once at a dinner in Malibu, Diane lifted her glass and said quietly, "To the woman who reminded me that laughter can be a kind of prayer." 3 decades, that's how long they had. 30 years of being the sister the other never had. 30 years of knowing someone saw you, really saw you, and loved you anyway. By 1996, Diane was 50 years old and her career was absolutely thriving. But something wasn't right. The applause was deafening, sure, but her nights, unbearably quiet. That kind of quiet that presses down on your chest and makes you wonder what all the success was even for. Then came a tiny cry cutting through the darkness. A baby girl who didn't share her DNA but somehow shared her heartbeat. Dexter. "I was scared to be alone forever," Diane admitted once. Then she arrived and the world made sense. That little girl saved her in ways she couldn't articulate. Diane learned motherhood the hard way, not through some natural instinct, but through trial and pure tenderness. Sleepless nights stumbling around in the dark. Spilled milk on the kitchen floor at 3 a.m., laughing and crying in equal measure because what else can you do when you're figuring it out as you go? 5 years later, she welcomed Duke. This soft-spoken boy whose laugh could fill an entire house with warmth. "He made me brave again," she told a friend. The 3 of them built something real together. Not some picture-perfect family from a magazine, but a home made from persistence and choosing each other every single day. Mornings meant burnt toast. Always burnt because Diane never quite mastered the toaster. Scribbled notes on bathroom mirrors that said, "You're doing great," when nobody felt like they were doing great. Movie nights where they'd all tangle up in blankets on the couch, making promises in the dark that they'd always be there for each other. She taught Dexter and Duke that family wasn't about matching blood types. It was about showing up every day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. "She didn't just raise us," Dexter said years later. "She rebuilt herself through us." That's the truth of it. For nearly 30 years, Diane's children were her compass, when everything else felt like it was spinning out of control. Through Duke's teenage storms and Dexter's wedding day, through every scraped knee and broken heart, Diane remained their center. Fragile sometimes, fierce always, endlessly human. Duke remembers how she'd call him at midnight just to ask if he'd eaten dinner. Then she'd call again in the morning to make sure he still knew she loved him. "She was everything gentle," he said softly after she passed. Those phone calls, those check-ins, they weren't annoying or overbearing. They were proof that someone was thinking about you when you weren't in the room. Now the phone stays silent. The mirror notes stopped appearing. In her studio, there's a camera by the window, still pointed toward the garden, capturing one last frame of sunlight she never got to print. Dexter walks past it sometimes, too afraid to touch it, like pressing the shutter might let all that remaining brightness escape into nothing. Carol Bayer-Sager, one of Diane's closest friends, she noticed it first. "I saw her 2 or 3 weeks ago, and she was very thin," Carol said, voice breaking. "She'd lost so much weight." It's the kind of thing that makes your stomach drop, because you know what it means even when nobody's saying it out loud. After the wildfires tore through Los Angeles earlier that year, damaging parts of her home, Diane retreated to Palm Springs. The desert became her cathedral. Wind, sun, and that profound kind of stillness you can't find anywhere else. Every morning she'd walk barefoot across cool tile floors, camera always in her hands, chasing what she called small miracles. The shadow of a palm leaf against white stucco, dust swirling through a beam of sunlight, a bird's wing disappearing into endless blue sky. Her body was getting weaker. Anyone could see that. But her hands, they didn't stop. "She was tired," Carol whispered, "but she never stopped creating." Those photographs she left behind, still unpublished, unnamed, they're her final diary. Each frame was a gentle goodbye written in brightness and shadow. It's like she already understood what she'd been teaching people her whole life. That art isn't just self-expression, it's how we leave something behind when we can't stay anymore. October 11th, 2025. The world stopped. Hollywood froze mid-breath. The woman who made vulnerability beautiful, who turned every awkward pause into poetry, who taught an entire generation that being different wasn't just okay, it was revolutionary. She was gone at 79. Goldie Hawn was standing on the veranda of her Pacific Palisades home when the call came. The ocean was shimmering below, palm trees swaying in the breeze, and for a moment she couldn't move. Her heart just refused to process what her ears were hearing. "No, not Diane," she said softly, and her voice cracked like glass hitting concrete. Just 1 week before, they'd been on the phone, teasing each other, laughing about nothing and everything. Diane had joked about her hat collection, about how getting older was just another performance you had to nail. Then her tone shifted, got softer. "Promise me you'll keep laughing," she'd said. Goldie laughed it off, thinking it was just another one of Diane's bittersweet lines. Now that echo was all she had left. The last words from a woman who'd spent her whole life turning pain into music. To the rest of the world, it was a headline scrolling across their phones. But to Goldie, this was the end of a chapter written in 3 decades of trust, laughter, and the kind of sisterhood you can't fake. "We promised we'd grow old together," she murmured through tears. "And somehow we did." The memorial in Los Angeles, it was everything you'd expect. Flowers everywhere, hushed voices. But when Goldie walked in clutching a single white rose, something in the room shifted. Her fingers wouldn't stop shaking. She stood there in front of Diane's portrait trying to lay that rose down, but her body kept refusing. Like if she didn't let go, maybe this whole nightmare wouldn't be real. When she finally spoke, her voice barely made it past a whisper. Diane was more than brilliant. She was brave. She didn't just make us laugh. She gave us permission to be real. Then she paused, swallowing hard. "She was the sister I never had. And the emptiness she leaves behind, it's deafening." Some people wept openly. Others just stood there with their heads bowed. Even Hollywood, that kingdom built on performance and pretend, it bowed before something purer. Love without conditions, friendship without agendas. After the ceremony ended and the cameras packed up and everyone else filtered out, Goldie stayed. The afternoon sunlight had turned this soft golden color, the same shade as Diane's hair used to catch under studio lamps all those years ago. She set the rose beside the portrait and reached out, fingertips barely touching the glass. "I'll keep laughing for both of us," she said under her breath. Then she turned, and for just a second her reflection caught in the frame. One woman carrying the warmth of 2 lives that had become completely intertwined. And sometimes now, in those hours before dawn when the world's still holding its breath, Goldie swears she hears it. That unmistakable laugh rising faintly through the stillness, like sunlight breaking through clouds. She never turns to look. She just smiles. Because some sounds don't ever truly leave. They just find new ways to stay. The tributes started flooding in almost immediately. Jane Fonda's voice shaking on live television, barely holding it together. "It's hard to believe," she said, and you could feel the weight of those words. Leonardo DiCaprio posted about her being fearless honesty in human form. Reese Witherspoon wrote, "She showed us that beauty is courage, not symmetry. Each one hitting different, each one true." Outside Diane's Los Angeles home, fans gathered with unsteady hands. Some brought lilies, her favorite flowers. Others left wide-brimmed hats lined up along the gate like silent guardians watching over the place she'd called home. One note, written in blue ink and fluttering in the breeze, said simply, "You made me brave enough to be myself." across the ocean, theaters dimmed their screens before late-night showings of Annie Hall. That film that made her immortal, now playing to rooms full of people who couldn't stop crying. In Palm Springs, at the edge of that desert she'd retreated to in her final months, a small crowd stood at sunset. No speeches, no tears, just wind moving through the dry grass, carrying something that sounded almost like her laugh coming back to them on the air. Her presence is everywhere if you know where to look. That camera still sitting by the window, pointed toward the garden. The stack of hats by the door that nobody can bring themselves to move. The smell of cedar and perfume that won't leave her empty chair. And maybe most of all, she lives in the millions of people she saved without even knowing it. Everyone who saw her on screen and finally saw themselves. Everyone who realized that being different wasn't something to fix, it was something to celebrate. History is going to remember the Oscars and the red carpets and those timeless roles that define generations. But her real triumph, it lived in moments nobody filmed. The rewrites at 3 a.m, those tears in makeup trailers, when everything felt impossible. The courage to show up when the whole world had already moved on to someone younger, fresher, easier to market. Years after the First Wives Club wrapped, when she'd reconnected with Goldie and laughter finally came back naturally, something shifted. Not the kind of laugh demanded by cameras and directors, but the kind that actually heals. The kind that reminds you why you're still here. And now that laugh lives on through everything she left behind, persistent and unbreakable, never letting go. Diane Keaton didn't fit Hollywood's mold, so she shattered it. She made awkwardness iconic, turned vulnerability into strength, and showed us that being yourself is the only thing that matters. I never tried to be different. I just didn't know how to be like everyone else. That's why we loved her. That's why she'll never be forgotten. If she touched your life, leave a comment below, share your favorite memory. Drop a heart. Let's keep her spirit alive.